Do y'all remember old Fred Craddock's story about the 9-pound crow? If you didn't know, old Fred Craddock was named one of the top 20 preachers in America in the 20th century. He used to teach at the Candler School of Theology, Biblical Studies, and he used to pastor a little church up in the mountains of North Georgia. And old Fred Craddock, he'd be sitting at his desk in his study writing his sermon, and one day he looked out his window and he saw a 9-pound crow walking down the road out front of his place. Now, I don't know how Fred knew it was a 9-pound crow. Maybe Fred had this special talent for gauging the weight of birds. I don't know. But Fred thought it was kind of interesting that this 9-pound crow walked straight down his street and then beyond till he couldn't see it anymore. And later on in the day, as Fred was still sitting at his desk working on his sermon for the week, he saw this 9-pound crow walking back down his street. And he thought, that's the strangest thing I've seen in a long time. The next day, Fred's sitting at his desk and he sees this 9-pound crow walking straight down his street until he couldn't see it anymore. And at the end of the day, that 9-pound crow walked back down the street as if returning home. Well, the third day when this happened, old Fred was ready. He saw that 9-pound crow walking down the street in front of his house, and he went out and stood on the front stoop of his house, and he called to the crow, "Hey, crow, what you doing there?" And the crow said, "Well, I'm just walking a piece down this road and beyond." And old Fred said, "Well, are you too fat to fly?" And that old crow said, "No," and what a thing to ask. And old Fred said, "Well, is your wing broken? Are you injured?" And the crow said, "No." And old Fred says, "Well, why aren't you flying? Why are you walking?" And that 9-pound crow looked at old Fred Craddock and said, "Fly? What, are you out of your mind? Fly? I'm terrified. If I flew, I might get hurt." Old Fred shrugged his shoulders. He didn't quite understand. And he said, "Hey, crow, what's your name?" And that 9-pound crow said, "Around here, they call me Church." It's a good name for a 9-pound crow that doesn't fly, isn't it? Church. Sometimes you have to admit that sometimes we who are God's church in the world tend to walk in our faith when we should be soaring. Oh, on Sundays we may gather and sing with great fervor and great catharsis. And God will raise us up on eagle's wings. But from Monday to Saturday, the rest of the week, sometimes we're pretty much careful-footed Christians. Sometimes we who are God's church struggle with our fears. Oh, we couldn't do that. Something terrible might happen. We couldn't do this. Something bad might happen. Sometimes we're like that 9-pound crow when we struggle with the ruts of our routine. Well, we've always done it this way. We've always walked up and down the street like a 9-pound crow rather than flying because, well, we are 200 years old, and that's the way we've done it for 2 centuries. I used to warn my students in seminary years ago, for Christ's sake, don't let yourself die a slow death of tedium when you enter Christ's church. Sometimes we're a little bit like a 9-pound crow when we struggle with our fear, with our ruts of routine. Sometimes we struggle with things like lack of time, our excuses. Oh, I would fly, Lord, if I had just a bit more time. I would fly, Lord, if you didn't demand so much of me. I would, Lord, but I've got a meeting somewhere else. I've got a conflict here or a conflict there. I don't know if any of you learned the song I learned way back in youth group when I was in high school growing up in the church called I Cannot Come to the Banquet. I cannot come to the banquet, don't trouble me now. I have married a wife, I have bought me a cow, I have fields and commitments that cost a pretty sum. Pray hold me excused, I cannot come. Of course, we were trying to stay interested, and we were a bit of a group of bratty teenagers. We like to fool around with the words and switch the order, and we'd say, I have bought me a wife, I have married a cow. At which time all the teenage girls in our youth group would hit us with their hymn books. But we who are called church sometimes can be a lot like a 9-pound crow named church. Sometimes it's our fear, sometimes it's the ruts of routine, sometimes it's lack of time, sometimes it's plain and simple self-doubt. Oh, I got these wings, but I'm not sure I can fly. I've got these wings, but I'm not sure I really could take flight. I might hop up and down in my faith, but I'm not sure I really could rise to great heights in the name of Jesus Christ. Oh, I belong to this great, wonderful, historic church called the Old Stone Church, which once soared to great heights, but that was a different generation. Those were the greats. That was the shoulders upon which this great nation was built. This is a different day and generation. I'm not sure we could be as great in our day and generation as those giants were 100 or even 200 years ago. No, sometimes self-doubt keeps us grounded. Some of you know that last summer Beth and I walked about 350 miles of the northern route of the Camino de Santiago. We walked about 15 or 20 miles every day for almost 3 weeks. Well, we were filled with doubts. We were filled with doubts months up to taking our Camino. We were filled with doubts when we got on the plane flying off to Spain. Are we really going to be able to do this? We were filled with doubts when we got to the starting point. We were filled with doubts the day we laced up our boots, put on our backpacks, filled up our water bottles, and took our first steps through the city. In fact, we were so filled with doubts when we started to practice, to train, to get ready so that we could overcome our self-doubts. We started taking long urban hikes around the city, 8 miles, 10 miles. We try and build up the distance. Of course, Cleveland's pretty flat, but we tried to do it. I remember one day last spring, Beth and I went out to a place called the Black River Reservation. I don't know how many of you know this wonderful path on the far west side of town. It's a beautiful little hike. It's about 3 miles and change one way, and so when you return, you walk over 6 miles or so, and it's lovely. It's a paved path that meanders along a river, and it's through forests and trees, and you walk across some zigzagging wooden bridges across rapids. It's lovely. And at one point, you'll come to a historic train trestle. I always wondered, did Amasa Stone and his company design that bridge? It doesn't say, even though there is a historic marker underneath the bridge that tells about the people of that time who built this train trestle and who helped develop the area in which we live now. The sign said, local people doubted whether they could develop this land and make it kind of a space for them and develop a place to live and make it habitable for kind of a white European kind of background. What really caught my attention, though, was those first 3 words. Local people doubted. And I thought to myself, doubt. It's almost inbred in us, isn't it? It's genetic. It's all of us doubt. Our ancestors doubted, and their ancestors doubted. Local people doubted. And you know what? Often local people still doubt. Are we really God's church for this place and this time? Is God really calling us to lift up God's holy word for this day and generation? Or am I just here to listen to some pretty music, to be with some friends? All good things. But am I really, underneath it all, a part of God's much greater and eternal plan? Local people doubted. I thought that was very interesting that they engraved it on a sign. I thought, boy, that sounds a lot like a 9-pound crow named church. Doubts. They can really keep us grounded sometimes, can't we? Can't they? Oh, we may ask for more faith during tough times. We may ask God to give us more faith during the difficult times, during a time of crisis or anxiety. Like the disciples of yesteryear, we may cry out to God, Lord, increase our faith. But if we're honest, I think more often than not, what we're really asking for, more than an increase in faith, what we're really asking God to do is fix it. Fix the thing that's troubling me, Lord. Take away the thing that's grieving me. Or worse, we're making excuses. Lord, fix it. I can't do this. Lord, take away this pain. I can't deal with that. I can't tell you how many times over the last 30 years of ministry, I've had people say to me, oh, Dr. Mark, Pastor, I wish I had faith like you. You're a pastor. And I'm only human. Now, I don't say this out loud, but inside I'm thinking, well, what the heck am I? I'm only human. What am I? I want to say out loud, although it's not very pastoral, I want to say, ha! Only human. Let me tell you about doubts. Let me tell you about fears. Let me tell you about troubles. I have as much fear, as much doubt, as much trouble as the next person. I have as much fear and doubt and trouble as a 9-pound crow called church. And you want to know the God's honest truth? When we cry out, Lord, increase faith. I've got fear, I got doubt, I got trouble. Jesus doesn't buy it. I know George Harrison sang My Sweet Lord, but sometimes Jesus isn't so sweet. He hears us cry out to increase faith, and he doesn't seem to have a lot of patience with us when we do that. Jesus knows deep down what we often deny, that we already have enough faith. Every single person in this room has enough faith to do the things that God is calling you to do right now. Maybe you're struggling with a health issue. Maybe you're struggling with a worry about a loved one. Maybe you're struggling with how to be church and how to be part of this church. Maybe the congregational nominating committee asked you to step up and be an elder in the upcoming class of officers. And you're thinking, I don't know if I could do that. Lord, you need to help me. You'd have to increase my faith. Jesus knows we already have enough faith. In fact, Jesus said, if you've got faith the size of a mustard seed, you could say to this mulberry tree, uproot yourself, and it would. Although, why does Jesus want to uproot mulberry trees? I have no idea. If you've got some idea, let me know. In fact, I think our faith ought to be leading us to plant mulberry trees and other trees as much as we can right now as we care for this creation. But Jesus seems to be saying, faith the size of a mustard seed has incredible power in this world. Maybe that's why he gets so touchy on the subject of faith. Maybe that's why he's so put out when the disciples bring up the subject of more. Jesus, I need more faith. Jesus, increase my faith. Jesus, can you give me a raise on my faith? Jesus is really put out, really touchy on those. I mean, I'm talking biblically speaking here. You flip through the gold-gilded pages of that Bible, and you're going to find Jesus kind of loses his cool every time a disciple asks for more faith. Think about it. When the disciples are out in the boat with Jesus on the sea and the storm kicks up and Jesus is sleeping, do they handle it? No, they wake Jesus up. They and their 9-pound crow wake Jesus up and say, Jesus, we're in trouble. There's a storm. And does Jesus have pastoral compassion on them? Does he say, well, let us sit and pray together? Does he hold their hand? No, he says, oh, you of little faith. He calls them names, little faith. Oh, you have little faith. Or when they brought to him the young man who was suffering with epilepsy so severely, they thought Jesus can fix it. They took him to Jesus. You know what Jesus said to them? He said, "You faithless generation, how much longer must I be among you? How much longer do I have to put up with you and your 9-pound crow?" Oh my gosh. You ask Jesus to increase faith, and he gets a little touchy. And today, Jesus chewed out the apostles simply for asking for more faith, for more. Jesus, give us more, when he knew full well they already had enough. And I suspect you and I know it too. We've got enough faith to do the things God calls us to do. You know, many years ago when Beth and I had just got married, Beth was doing some child care for a little guy in our church and kind of being a nanny for some folks in our congregation. And their little guy was about, 3.5 years of age. His name was Ozzy. I don't know if they named him after Ozzy Osbourne or Ozzy and Harriet, but I thought it was kind of a neat name for a 3.5-year-old. And anytime Ozzy's mom was giving Ozzy a snack or a treat, she'd say, "Here you go, Ozzy, but don't take too much. Yes, you may have some chips, Ozzy, but don't take too much. Yes, Ozzy, you can have some candies, but don't take too much." Well, one night they were sitting down to dinner, and Mom's serving up the dinner, and she said, "Ozzy, how many potatoes would you like?" And you know what Ozzy said? He said, "Mom, I'd like too much." Sometimes I think we in the church can be a little bit like Ozzy when it comes to faith. We want too much when enough will do. Faith the size of a mustard seed is enough to do the things that God has been calling us to do all along. To love God with all our heart, our soul, our mind, our strength. To love our neighbor as one of our very own kin. To seek justice, love kindness, to walk humbly with God each and every day. Every single one of us has enough faith to do that. Besides, I've got a theory, and I believe it's a theory based in Scripture. And my theory is this: faith isn't something you measure. Faith isn't something that can be measured. It's not like you can put faith in a measuring cup, like half a cup of flour or half a cup of milk. You can't measure it out with a tablespoon or a teaspoon and say, "Well, I've got a teaspoon of faith, Lord, I'd like a tablespoon." It's not something you can measure in a beaker. It doesn't come in liters or gallons, depending whether you're going metric or imperial standard units. Faith isn't something that you can measure that way. Faith isn't something you can accumulate, like getting more points to gain strength in a video game, or building up more stardust or candies to evolve or increase your Pokemon power. Faith doesn't work that way. In fact, faith is very much a gift from God, and it comes with a lifetime supply. It's not something that you can measure or need to measure. You always have enough faith so long as you're living your life in relationship with Jesus Christ and with His Word for you. As long as Christ is in you and around you and His Spirit is sustaining you, as long as you're feasting on His Word in your life, you've got enough. You've got enough faith. The question is, 9-pound crow. The question is, church. The question is, Mark Giuliano, are we using the faith that has been gifted to us by God through Jesus Christ? Think about it. How does a 9-pound crow fly? With his wings. He doesn't need to ask for more wings. He doesn't need to ask for bigger wings. He just needs to use the wings that he's got. Do you know, the Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu once said, when it comes to desire and longing, we're often like fish looking for water. It's all around us. It's in us. The fish are taking in water and extracting oxygen from it all the time to sustain them with life. That's the way it is with Jesus. We've got enough faith. Christ is all around us, and Christ is in us and sustaining us each and every single day. You know, one of the strangest things to me about this text in Luke chapter 17 is where those apostles are when they ask Jesus to increase their faith. Or better yet, with whom they are gathered when they ask Christ to increase their faith. They're with Jesus. Jesus is right there in their midst. They've been living with Jesus. They've been walking with Jesus. They've been studying with Jesus. They've been dining with Jesus. They've been sleeping with Jesus. They've been healing with Jesus. He's right there in their midst. And they say, Jesus, can you do me a favor? Increase my faith. How much more faith do you need than Jesus? Somebody ought to be shouting amen right now. How much more faith do we need than Jesus? Jesus is in their midst. Jesus is right there in the flesh and blood talking with them. How much more faith do you need? Well, Jesus is still in our midst, isn't he? He's in our midst in a word spoken. Jesus is with us. His word is with us, and it becomes flesh in our own lives as we live it. Jesus is with us at the table in the breaking of the bread and the lifting of the cup. Jesus is with us in this Spirit that kind of comes to us and upon us and in us and sustains us. How much more faith do we need than Jesus? We've got as much faith as we need to take flight. Now, I don't know about all of you. Some of you probably are the same generation as I am. I grew up in that generation, born in the 60s, raised in the 70s, where every year, once a year, we'd gather with neighbors, particular one neighbor because they had a colored TV. We'd gather at the neighbor's house with friends and family, and we'd watch every year as the television broadcast Wizard of Oz. And because that movie came in color when they were in Oz, we wanted to be at our neighbors and watch this on a colored television set. But every year as we watched Wizard of Oz, and they got to that very kind of end scene in Oz, where the great and powerful Oz was going to whisk Dorothy home in that hot air balloon. But the balloon got away on him. I don't know how to fly this thing, he said, like a 9-pound crow. And then Glinda shows up. Glinda, the good witch from Canada. The good witch of the north, right? Could have been Cleveland, I suppose. The whole time the scene's playing inside, I'm like, Dorothy, look at your feet. Look at your feet. Look at the shoes. You've got the power, Dorothy. And then Glinda shows up. And really, as you look at it, kind of like the Holy Spirit. This kind of wispy figure that appears and disappears, almost spirit-like, comes floating in this like shining ball, comes down and appears before Dorothy. And she says, Dorothy, you've always had the power. You've always had the power. It's on your feet. All you have to do is click your heels together and say, there's no place like home. There's no place like home. And I don't know about you, but when I was really little, 5 or 6, I'd be whispering it along with Dorothy. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. But you know, as a grown-up, I'm thinking there's a kind of message there for us that's very similar to the message Jesus had for the apostles that day. You've always had the faith. You've always got the power to do the things God is calling you to do, to confront the things that feel like they're confronting you. You've got it in you. And it's all around you. My faith, the faith that is yours, is a gift from God through me. It's never in short supply. It's always there sustaining you. You've got it with you. I think that's what Jesus wanted the apostles to know. I think that's what Jesus wants us, his church, to know. Otherwise, I'm concerned that we, his church, may be little more than a big, glorious, 200-year-old, stained glass, 9-pound crow. And I don't believe that's who we are. I believe we are God's church, Christ's light in the world for this day and this generation. And I believe that with faith the size of a mustard seed, we will be God's people and do God's will in this time, in this day, and in this generation. Praise be to God. Amen.
Thanks for watching our video. Make sure to subscribe to get the latest and greatest videos from the Old Stone Church. And if you feel blessed by our message, please go to theoldstonechurch.org and click Donate. God bless you today and forever. The Old Stone Church. We've been loving Christ and serving City since 1820.